what have you seen of this phenomenon of oh snap, what did I do?
I've seen, like, I was just watching a TikTok about a Trump supporter having ICE called on them, or like their family. I know that that was kind of some of the things that they were saying, that some people who were like Latino, and then they were dealing with the backlash of their Trump supporting neighbors not wanting their children to play with them, or the fear that DACA would be repealed. And it's just been a really interesting thing watching people, two things, right? Like when you're saying, you're risking people's rights. What rights, right? And it just shows how uneducated people are to, one, not do enough research before you vote for somebody, and two, to not ask these questions beforehand, because people were having these realizations and saying, hey, if you vote for Trump, you are, putting my rights in danger. And people are like, oh, okay. And now it's like, well, what rights are you risking losing? Are you serious right now? Um, I think that the most interesting thing about stupidity is its immunity to see itself. So a lot of times you're having these conversations with people who don't understand that they don't understand.
Wow.
I talked to a Black male Trump supporter the other day, and I've known him for a long time, and I was like very shocked that he was a Trump supporter. We hadn't talked in a couple of years, but I saw something he posted on Instagram, and I was like, hey, let me call this person. And he's really religious, which I don't want to give him a pass for that, but I understand that when you're really religious, you have the tendency to make things that don't make sense, and call it faith.
Wow.
So, the conversation was about, um, a part of the conversation, we talked about abortion rights. And so we talked about, I said, so, in the case of sexual assault, do you think that a woman should be allowed to get an abortion? And he disagreed. And I said, so you're saying that a woman should be responsible to bear the evil of someone who's harmed her? No, that's not what I'm saying. What you're saying, right? Like, that's essentially what you're saying, that it's still, a woman has to carry this evil with her, whether she wants to or not. And so, there's always, like, even having conversations with men who are saying like, oh, well, in what place in the United States is a woman keeping her baby who's been sexually assaulted? And I'm like, are you serious? Right? Because these are men who are having conversations. And these aren't just white men having conversations that are making the laws. These are men who are having conversations about women's bodies and don't even know how they work. Um, so I find that like really interesting. It's like, well, what about this? And again, a lot of these men don't understand that a lot of us are the product of women who had abortions, right? And some of the abortions that they had were babies that they wanted. They were babies who they wanted to carry to term, but their bodies decided that that wasn't going to happen, and they needed a DNC, right? And so many of our mothers are alive because they had DNCs before we were even born. But nobody wants to talk about that. It's just, oh, you get pregnant, it's your responsibility, you have to keep the baby no matter what. And also the I hate child support crowd is also, a lot of them are also anti-abortion, which is crazy.
Mm.
Those are
It
my
is
thoughts.
a conundrum. You don't want to pay child support, but you also don't want women to control their births. Let's get some calls on the line. The irony of all of this is just, I keep being overwhelmed with the irony of all of it. Let's take some calls. Kyla Janae Lacey is here. Let's go back to William in Tennessee. I think he's ready now. William in Tennessee, thank you for calling. What do you have to say?
First of all, thank you for coming back to me. I appreciate that. Ms. Favors, can you hear me now? Am I clear?
Yes, you're
Is that
clear.
a yes? Can you hear
Hear
me?
you. Hear you perfectly.
Okay, good, good. Thank you for yesterday. Thank you for every day showing us your heart and being courageous enough to allow people to see your heart. seeing yours touch mine.
Thank you.
So I want to bring my brick, and I also want to bring my star to the conversation about what we should do. And I don't have enough time. I would love for you to take the time one day, and I'd even collaborate with you on this subject. I think one of our solutions, I moved back to Tennessee. I moved to Tennessee from California 19 years ago. I'm originally from New Jersey, and I was born in Detroit. And I'm a Vietnam veteran. To hell with Bob. So I came back here to the South because I understood that this was where our battleground is. This is the heart and soul of the white nationalist Christian movement. This is also for those of us, the lost children of Shabazz, us. This is where our inheritance is, and our families had to leave here. My original family on my father's side is from South Carolina, and on my mother's is from Georgia, with Gullah Geechee. And they had to leave and go to New Jersey so that they could have a better life. And I was sitting in my house, which was 2 blocks away from the beach in Ventura, California, and I felt like a coward. And I thought to and I had reached where I needed to reach in life, and I had done things that I needed to do in life, and I felt like a coward because I realized that the battle was here. Now, I want you to also know that I ran for a public office in this particular election as an independent. I received the 5th highest number of votes of anybody that ran in the state of Tennessee as an independent, 8,003 votes. And I've never ran for anything before. I didn't win, but I did run. I think more Black people, more progressive-minded people need to move back to the South. We ain't got no place to go.
Heard some of that. Thank you so much for that. And I really, truly appreciate your words. And I love how you framed it. You're here to bring your brick and your star. I think that we need that on a t-shirt. I've got my brick and my star, because it really does speak to how we show up, because the service that we can provide to our people is going to make the difference. It's going to be all about service. And I think that, I recently watched Charles Blow's documentary on Back to South. And he was saying much the same, that we need more progressives to move back down South. And I think that while there's there has been some truth to some points there, the challenge that we face is that now the South, the Republican-led states, are going to need people. Our folk who are there are in hostile territory. They are going to need folk in blue states, to the extent that blue states can still be considered a space of refuge, to be able to amass resources to funnel to our people there. If all of us leave these blue states and go back to the red states, I don't think that that's going to work. We're going to have to be able to build a new vision of underground railroads, such that perhaps we're not moving people, but we are moving resources. We're moving skill sets. We're able to show up the way that Bernard showed up for Miss Alpha. For those of you who know that story, Miss Alpha, that elder who was living by herself and working at the election poll site, and Bernard, who drove hours to be there with her to protect her and give our elder that safety. We're going to need to be able to move resources. Now, Bernard didn't move to San Bernardino, California, but he is now a conduit of help and support for Miss Alpha, because he was able to be present of mind enough to serve, and to serve outside of his immediate area. Kyla, Janae, Lacey, what do you have to say about this idea that perhaps more of us should be moving?
As a person who lives in the South, I was born in Chicago, but I've lived in the South most of my life. And I don't live in Florida now, but I don't necessarily always consider Florida the South either. With that said, right, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not brave enough to move to Mississippi or Alabama. I'm not. When I drive back to Florida, I'm reminded how red my state is. Before I even make it to the state line, I am inundated with one of the largest Confederate flags I've ever seen in my life every single time I go down to Florida. So, it's a beautiful thing in theory, right? But to say, the Black migration, the Great Migration, was on purpose. And I do understand, you know, it's safer. So you can't really blame people for going towards safety in a country that is constantly made us feel unsafe. I think if that works best for some, sure, but I don't blame anybody for not wanting to live, you know, in the South, especially with what they're teaching in schools. Resistance is important, but I don't blame anybody for not leaving what feels safe to them and going to something that is dangerous, uprooting their lives to go towards something that is possibly, you know, like, because they're not playing out here, right? They're not playing. So it's not even a matter of, oh, it'll be cool. Like, nah, I'm good. I live in Georgia, and that's enough for me already.
You know, I
So
think that's such a good point. The Great Migration didn't happen because people were seeking luxury apartment styles. The Great Migration
yeah,
happened because we did not have a systematic way to protect ourselves from the hordes of violent white nationalism.
yeah.
And so that's another thing we have to prepare for. So hopefully Bob is preparing people. I keep picking on Bob because I think it's amazing to me to still think you're a magical Negro in this day and age. But one of the things that I took issue with, even in Charles Blow's documentary about folks moving down South, you're encouraging people to move down South when redistricting is going to be able to be as racist as it needs to be.
Yeah, yeah, gerrymandering, all the
Yes,
terrible schools.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And no functional way or plan for how to organize effectively to secure the resources that we need within that context.
I mean, and the schools are important, right? Because the South is really kind of leading the charge for school vouchers, and Black children are, you know, the sell is that it's benefiting Black children the most when it's actually benefiting rich white children the most.